and welcome to this talk on an Inspector Calls, which is a play by J.B. Priestley, a 20th century British playwright. In the play, he has a great character called Inspector Ghoul, and he tells us, the audience, as well as the characters, we don't live alone, we are members of one body. And I personally think this message is very important today and resonates with our current times. So I hope you can join me for the next little while as I talk about this incredible play. Main points of this talk. Basically, it's a brief look at this great play. We're going to have the plot, the characters, the staging, the themes, and the wider context. Then a brief biography of the writer, Mr. Priestley, and finally a highlighted analysis of three versions of an Inspector Calls, a physical theatrical performance by Stephen Daldry, a 2015 BBC TV movie, and a Hong Kong dark satirical comedy made in the same year, 2015. So here we go. A brief plot outline and main characters in this three-act drama, which takes place on a single night in April 1912, in a kind of similar way to James Joyce's Ulysses, over the course of a very small period of time. It focuses on the prosperous upper middle class Burling family, Arthur and Sybil Burling, and their children Sheila and Eric. There are other characters, including Gerald Croft, who's also important, Sheila's fiance, and less so Edna, the Burling's maid. The Burling family is visited by Inspector Ghoul, who questions the family about the suicide of a young working class woman called Eva Smith, also known as Daisy Renton. And in a kind of twist on the usual murder mystery drama, it becomes apparent that all the main characters knew Eva and all in some way contributed to her death, but indirectly because she ultimately committed suicide. So it's a very interesting play. Okay, so here are the main characters in the play, excluding myself, obviously. This is from the BBC 2015 version. I'm not going to go into all of the little nuances and details because I hope that you, after watching this video, you go and read the play yourself and enjoy it yourself. So I'm not going to give away all the details, and it would take too long if I did anyway. But I'll just give you a flavour. So Arthur Burling, he's a wee bit of a selfish, middle class, upper middle class man about the town. He's married to Sybil Burling, and in a similar way, she's thinking very much about how other people look at her and her position in society. Although they do love their children in a way. Their children are Sheila and Eric. Like their parents, they have flaws, maybe to do with their upbringing. In J.B. Priestley with his play is poking at sort of the elitism in society. And they contribute towards Eva's tragic suicide in different ways. Gerald Croft there at the bottom left, he is Sheila's fiance, and he is the son of a businessman, another businessman, and that businessman is sort of a rival with Arthur Burling, the man in the top left. So Arthur wants Sheila to marry Gerald in order to bring his business together with his rival. So it's kind of an unusual, maybe, I don't know, weird situation. Gerald Croft, he also has flaws, quite significant flaws, but at the same time, maybe like Sheila and Eric, he has some redeemable features. I should say that Eric perhaps does commit the most serious offense, perhaps a crime. It is a crime in the play, although it's not directly stated. So you'll need to go and have a look at that yourself, to do with sexual assault. So lots of different things happening. Eva Smith there, played by Sophie Rundle in this BBC version, we sort of see and hear about her more indirectly from other characters within Priestley's play. She comes across as an attractive and intelligent young woman who has lots of aspirations, but unfortunately she's born into more sort of poorer background, so she relies on other people, and unfortunately, all of these members of society in different jobs she has, they kind of all let her down, despite her good working behavior. So it's a bit of a tragedy in a way, this play. And Inspector Gould, the bottom right, played by David Thewlis, I think he plays it brilliantly in the BBC version. He's quite an amazing character. He's kind of a mysterious, omniscient, almost godlike character who seems to know everything. And some people say that he may be a representation of Priestley himself. He's almost like a superhero. I think of him maybe like a Socratic questioner, sort of unassuming, comes and goes. Maybe he's mystical, not even alive. So we're left with many questions at the end of this play. So I've not really told you everything there with this characterization, just to give you a feeling of how this play works. So here's just a little bit more information, general information about An Inspector Calls. It was first performed in Moscow in 1945, near the end of World War II. However, interestingly, it was set in 1912, so 2 years before the First World War. And this is important because J.B. Priestley was trying to send a powerful message to his contemporary audience, a kind of warning, if you like, to say that be careful of all those little everyday actions or little grievances, little things you do in your day-to-day life. Try to be a good person, because you never know how little things can build up and become something more significant and end to a fatal or tragic outcome, like in the play. It is a chimera. So the second point, what I mean by that is it is a mixture. So it is part detective thriller, part whodunit, and part moralistic play. So a serious message underneath the entertaining value of it. It is also seen as exposing Edwardian and Victorian hypocrisy, so in that late 19th and early 20th century. So, for example, according to an act, a political act, the Matrimonial Causes Act of 1857, to do with marriage, women could be divorced on the grounds of their adultery alone, cheating. However, on the other hand, while it had to be proved that men had exasperated adultery with other offences. So, in essence, marriage was unequal. Their rights, women's rights, were unequal compared to men. Women had to prove more, whereas men had to prove less in order to get a divorce. Additionally, this play is an expression of Priestley's socialist political beliefs. So, in a way, he has, I think, some similarities to Orwell or Charles Dickens, for example. He sees literature and his play as a way of speaking to people in a wider sense. He was brought up in Bradford, in kind of northern England, where there was squalid conditions for the working class, dirty, overcrowded housing, and they had to often work long hours. So it's the end of the Victorian period. His father was a school headmaster who also had a significant impact on his life, because his father was, I think, a good man and tried to do right by people. So he probably was a powerful, positive motivator. And then Priestley also served during the First World War, and I'll go into that, I think, a little bit later. And that was a big impact on his belief. So do you remember who these characters are? A little interval within this presentation. Do you remember who these characters are? I'll leave you just for a minute to think. There's all of the main characters in the play, except for perhaps one. You can just see her shoulder on the right-hand side of the screen there. Do you know? Can you remember? So on the left there you have, or on that side, sorry, you have Inspector Gould, this interesting detective. Then next to him you have Eric Burling, and below him you have Arthur Burling, the father. And on the other side you have Gerald Croft, who's standing next to Sheila Burling, his fiancée. And yet out of the picture you have Sybil Burling. So those are the main characters there in the play.